Hello, everyone. Good evening. Hi. I want to start today by reading the university's land acknowledgement. The University of Scranton acknowledges the original inhabitants and nations of this land, the Lenape, the Munsee, the Shawnee, and the Susquehannocks. May we be ever mindful of their legacy and contributions and commit ourselves to stewarding this land with care and compassion as we navigate our communities towards faith and justice. And another good evening, class of 2028. My name is Hank Willenbrink. Go ahead, give yourselves a round of applause. Thank you. My name is Hank Willenbrink. I'm an associate professor in the Department of English and Theater and coordinator of the first-year seminar. It's my great honor on behalf of our acting provost, Dr. David Marks, to welcome you to the 2024 Ignatian Values in Action lecture and to introduce tonight's guest, Stephanie Saldana. Stephanie is no stranger to Scranton. Her book, The Bread of Angels, was our choice for the 2019 Ignatian Values in Action lecture. And I have to tell you, she gave one of the most extraordinary talks that I've had the pleasure of seeing here. No pressure, Stephanie. I also want to take this moment to acknowledge and thank the first-year seminar advisory group, which includes Dr. Marks, Dr. Gretchen Van Dyke, Dr. Mary Troy, Dr. Stephen Whitaker, and librarian Kate Cummings, who were instrumental in selecting this book, as well as former Provost Michelle Maldonado and our President, Father Marina. Yesterday, when my first-year seminar class, Latest and Greatest, was discussing part 2 of What We Remember Will Be Saved, one of my students, this is my shout out to Addie, shared an insightful analysis. She pointed to page 67 and quoted, quote, "I knew that the bazouk with the 24 frets along the neck was especially suited to producing microtones, micro-intervals that fall between the notes I was accustomed to hearing in so-called Western music and therefore holding the possibility of revealing new depths of sound," unquote. "I wonder," Addie said, "if this description of the bazouk could be understood as a metaphor for the role of the author. She provides us with the microtones, the stories between what we think we know." It's in the spirit of Addie's contribution that I'm pleased to now give you a little bit of Stephanie Saldana's biography. Stephanie Saldana is a journalist and religion scholar from San Antonio, Texas, who has spent most of the last 20 years living in the Middle East. In addition to Bread of Angels and What We Remember Will Be Saved, which she'll talk about tonight. And for those of you who brought books, she's available to sign those at the end of the lecture. In addition to those wonderful works, Stephanie's work has also been published in the New York Times, the Washington Post, Wall Street Journal, American Magazine, and featured on National Public Radio. Stephanie and her family split time between Bethlehem and France. Please join me in giving a warm royal welcome back to Stephanie Saldana.
Hello, everyone. That's a lot of chairs. It's amazing to be here. It's just such a joy. It was a special surprise to come in and see the Northern Lights outside. I want to thank Dr. Hank, the first-year advisory group, Christian and Melinda Crocus, teachers, facility staff, Kyle, Sean, and Jason back there who are working on the sound for me, and all of you readers who have made tonight possible. But more than anything, and I don't know if some of them will watch this on YouTube after, but I want to thank the people whose stories I tell. So I want to thank Hannah, Farhad, Hozan, Munir, Adnan, Gadir, and Qasim. So I wonder if you would maybe just give them a round of applause. As you know, I live in the Middle East, so I'll just be upfront to say it's been a year. It's been quite a difficult year for me and my family. I'm an author, but first and foremost, I'm a mother of 3 children. And most days we don't really know what to say. It's like we've reached the limits of language. But I've learned some of what helps us during what seem like hopeless times. We can turn to our families. We can turn to our friends. We can turn to our community and our faith. And we can turn to stories, especially the stories of others who have been through times like ours and have come out still creative and faithful and good. So today I want to talk about the hope that sustains us. I guess all of you have been reading my book, The Bread of What We Remember Will Be Saved, which tells the story of my journey around the world to meet people who escaped Iraq and Syria. As you know, I lived in Syria before the war. It's an incredible place where I met so many friends, had incredible teachers. So when the war started, it wasn't like a war that happened and you just watch it on the news. It was a war that was happening to my friends. And so when I watched the news, I didn't feel like I was seeing anything that reminded me of the people that I knew. But then I saw one story. It's a story about a young man named Rami Basisa. He was from Homs, and he was a violin player. And before he had to escape, he took his violin and he wrapped it in plastic wrap. And he had to take the sea route to Europe, which was very dangerous, you can drown. But he survived. And when he arrived on the other side, he was surrounded by other people who had escaped the war. He was really tired and scared. And he unwrapped his violin and he played it. And he played Ode to Joy. I saw that story and I thought, okay, these are the people I recognize, right? These are my friends. And I started to wonder what would happen if I traveled around the world and I looked for other stories like that. What would happen if I looked for the people who were saving music? Or the people saving their recipes? This is Maftul from the south of Dara. What if I met people saving their embroidery? I wondered what happened to the famous tailors of Aleppo. And what about people who wanted to save their gardens? How would they save them as they escaped the war? So I traveled for many years to 9 countries, and as you know, I wrote this book, What We Remember Will Be Saved. So the story begins when I write about a place called Karakosh. Karakosh is a town in Iraq. I guess you've read about it. Full of Christians who speak a dialect of Aramaic, which you might know is most well known for being the language that Jesus probably spoke. In 2014, they all had to escape, and they arrived in Jordan. They thought that they didn't bring anything with them. But when they found each other, they realized that they shaved their church choir. So here they are, they're about your age. And I'm going to play just a little bit of what they saved, if you can play. Yalla.
لليوم
the shaky camera, I'm a writer, not a filmmaker, clearly. But if you heard them, they're singing their liturgical songs, and they're saving a little thing. So when I met them, it was the first time I understood that when people were escaping war, they were saving little things. But these little things had a huge power. They were a way of saying that goodness finds a way to survive. Maybe it's only in a song, but that song is a link to our ancestors and to a part of the human spirit that can't be destroyed. A song is a little thing, like the mustard seeds that we read about in the Gospels. But we believe in the power of little things, and that is our faith. We know that one impulse of grace, Dorothy Day wrote, is of infinitely more power than a cobalt bomb. So in the middle, you'll see wearing the red shirt. Let's see there, in the middle, that's Mina. So she asked me what I was doing, and I said, well, I'm traveling around the world. I'm asking people a little bit what they saved. And she said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, well, maybe a shirt, or maybe a song, maybe a recipe, or maybe a dress. And she said, a dress? And I said, yes, a dress. And she said, you have to meet my mom. She saved a dress. She didn't bring it with her, but she made it when she escaped. This is Hannah. Some of you may know Hannah from the book. Hannah, mother of 3, escaped Karakosh. And when she escaped, she thought that she left everything behind. But then she wondered how she was going to take her village with her. And so one day, when she knew she was never going home again, she went to the market and she tried to remember, what was the color of my well? What was the color of the water? What was the color of my churches? And she bought thread in that color. And she decided to sew the entire story of her town into a dress. This is Hannah's dress. It's called a shawl. But it didn't take long for me to understand this was not just a dress. This was an entire world, right? If you want to see a little bit about the dress, this is her language at the top right-hand corner. It says Baghdada in Syriac. Her name in Arabic. That's the church of El Tahara, the church of Marbahna Mansera. If you see them dancing there, they're dancing a dance called the Debke that we dance at weddings. And if you look closely, there's people on the dress wearing the dress. So the older women are wearing the dress on the dress. There's 2 musicians playing the flute and the drums. I asked her, why are they wearing different clothes? She said, oh, they're from a different village. So they're from Bashika. You have her home, and you have this little faded line at the bottom. She said, that's my exile. Life will never be as colorful as it was before, but it will continue. Here's Hannah. Hannah's dress put me in front of a reality that would change me forever. I'd read about the hundreds of thousands killed in the war and about the millions displaced, but they were numbers. Hannah showed me that every single one of those people is an entire world. Every human being is a world. In the Ignatian tradition, the principle and foundation, which is at the heart of Jesuit spirituality, Ignatian spirituality, begins with 3 words. Human beings are created. Each one of us is created and created good. Every single one of us is an entire world. She just makes it easy to understand that because she put her entire world on a dress. But every single one of you, every single one of us is an entire world of infinite dignity and worth. That's why in both Islamic and Jewish tradition they say, if you save a single life, it will be as though you saved all of mankind. If you destroy a single life, it will be as though you destroyed all of mankind. Hannah invites us to live in the world differently. So when we look at the news and we see that someone has died in the sea crossing, we know an entire world has been destroyed. But if a child is pulled from the rubble, we know that an entire world has been saved. The second story in the book is about Farhad, there on the left, and Hazan, two best friends from Al-Hasake. They're musicians. And they grew up in a place where they spoke Kurdish, right? Where they were, there weren't historians like you think of historians. When they went to school, they weren't allowed to speak Kurdish. They weren't allowed to learn about Kurdish history. And so it was passed down through the storytellers and through those who sang songs, right? When they were kids, they would sit around and they would listen to the songs. So the storytellers would sing them, and they would sing them back until they memorized them. And in that way, history was passed down from generation to generation. They knew that one day it would be their time to sing. They went away to Homs to study music, but eventually they had to escape, and they fled to Turkey. Farhad's sister died, Evin, in a bombing, and he fell into depression. And then he heard her voice come into his heart, and her voice told him, it's time to sing. It's time to sing. And so they decided to save their music. And in saving their community's music, they saved their community's history. So at this time, most of the storytellers had escaped. Most of the musicians had escaped, which would be like if all of the books in your library scattered around the world. But they knew that as long as they continued to sing the songs existed, and they would be remembered. So if you could just play a little bit of Farhad and Hazan's music. They're pretty great. Thank you. Farhad, if you're watching, we love you, Farhad. So Farhad and Hazan started saving their music. And in saving their music, they were saving their history. They were saving their stories. They were saving their language. But they discovered that they were saving something else, right? When they played in the middle of the war, people would come to listen. They would dance, and they would remember. And what would they remember? They would remember joy, right? So it used to be that you would play this music at a wedding, or you would play this music at a feast day, right? And people would dance, and there was joy, right? And now during the war, when they played the music, people remembered that joy had existed. And then they thought the joy might exist again. If you live in war long enough, you notice that somehow joy still has a way of existing. I was just talking about a cookie shop around the corner from where I live that we keep going to during the war. I don't know why getting cookies during war seems like a good idea, but that's where the joy is. War is boring, it takes up all of the oxygen in the room, but hope and joy move in the opposite direction. It draws us forward. It helps us to live. And joy is found in the most difficult places. Another one of my favorite Jesuits, Father Gregory Boyle, when he was asked why he does his work with former gang members, he says, because that's where the joy is. Right? And so Farhad is teaching us to go where the joy is, right? He's asking us to find joy. So I told Farhad, hi Farhad, that I was going to talk to you today, and I asked him what he wanted me to say to you. And he asked me to ask you to do one thing, and that's to create something. He wants each one of you to create something, to bake a cake, to light a candle, to sing a song, to do anything that brings some light into the difficult world. In a sense, Farhad wants you to go where the joy is. He says, we are trying to hear happiness. There are many people who are working on the war, making things about the sadness, the loss. Okay, that's fine, everyone knows that, but there must be another road which reveals our strength. In the third book, we meet Munir. When I'm on the island of Lesbos, I meet a young man who has escaped war, and he's helping everyone he meets. When I meet him, he's helping old people to put up their tents. When I talk to him, he tells me that he lost everything. He lost his city, had to leave his family behind, but it turns out that what he's kept is his goodness. He knows that he's a helper, right? When he tells me about the war, he tells me a simple story. He says that during the war, he didn't get to study, but he helped his sisters to study. So he said, I wasn't able to study, but I became the candle by which my sisters study. He said, every day I walked them to school, I dropped them off, and I waited for them at the end of the day. He said there was a good chance that I was going to die in a bomb, but I was waiting for them. Later, when he had to escape, he carried the bags of his family, and then when there was an explosion, he carried his sister. Then, when he had to escape to Europe, he carried the bags of those who were fleeing. When he arrived in the camp, he helped people set up their tents. And when I arrived, he took care of me. I'm a helper, he said. As I was reflecting on Munir and how he managed to save his goodness, his kindness, I was reminded of two things that you're going to hear over and over, I think, in these next 4 years. The first is this saying, go set the world on fire. Have you guys heard this yet? Yes. So apparently Ignatius signed his letters, go set the world on fire. Now, I don't like this saying at all. It might be where I come from, but the image of setting things on fire is not very comforting to me right now. There's another saying that you're going to hear a lot. Who here has heard men and women for others? Right, this is the famous request of Pedro Arrupe, the former superior general of the Jesuits, who said we should be men for others, which became men and women for others, right? But a friend of mine who's Palestinian told a Jesuit priest, Father Peter de Brule, who told me, we don't need you to be for us. We need you to be with us, right? So now we say men and women for and with others. It's a mouthful. But I like to think that we should be candles for one another, right? That each one of us should be a candle for one another. We should try to be like Munir is, right? Just to live in such a way that we help others. Sometimes that means being smaller so they can be bigger. Sometimes that means doing little things that nobody sees. but we should try to be a candle for others. In a sense, he shows us what it is to live as people following the Ignatian tradition. Finally, we arrive at the fourth story, Gadir and Adnan's pharmacy. Has anyone here already read the story of Gadir and Adnan's pharmacy for your class? Yeah. Hi, Gadir and Adnan. I hope they're watching. So for me, this is the greatest story about hope that I've ever heard. And that's why every time I come to Scranton, I tell the same story, right? So I'm going to tell it again. Here's Adnan and here's Gadir, two pharmacists who fell in love, right? They met in Jordan, then went back to Aleppo. And they're supposed to get married, but there's a problem. Normally, in Syria, if you want to get married, you should buy a house and fill it up with furniture in order to show that you're ready to get married. But Adnan didn't want to buy a house. He wanted to buy a pharmacy. So he was worried that Gadir wasn't going to take him seriously. But Gadir was completely supportive. And that's when he knew that this wasn't going to be just a marriage. This was going to be a total partnership. So Adnan built a pharmacy in the middle of Aleppo, and it did really, really well. They had their first child, then they had their second child. They said their biggest problem was figuring out what new car to get every year, like to trade their old car in for. But then when the war started, one day Adnan was walking to work. And what happened? He heard gunshots. And he thought, I'll just come back tomorrow. But the pharmacy was gone, right? The pharmacy was on the front lines of the war and was completely destroyed and everything in it taken. Because he owned the pharmacy, he didn't have the money to pay his rent. And so they lost the pharmacy and they lost their home too. It was war, it was cold, there was no electricity, they were scared, people started escaping Aleppo. But then Adnan's uncle left his house on the other side of Aleppo and said, just come stay in it. At least you'll have a place to stay. So they went and moved in this strange house on the other side of Aleppo, and they waited. Waited and waited. Gadir kept teaching, but Adnan was completely depressed, right? About a year went by. And then one day, they were walking past the house, and Gadir started looking at the garage and sort of measuring it out and thinking, Adnan, unbeknownst to her, was doing the same. And they started to think, what would happen if we built a pharmacy in the garage? But everyone they told said this was crazy. You don't build a pharmacy in the garage. You don't build anything during a war. During a war, if you have money, you save it and put it on the side, right? But Gadir said, I don't want to live like that. We don't wait until the war is over to start living our lives. We live right now. But there was only one problem. If you're going to open a pharmacy, you need materials and you need money. And they didn't have either of these things. So this is when Gadir realized that she has something called the eyes of creation. She realized that she could look into the ruined city, and in the ruins, she could see the materials to build something new. She could find a chair that was broken and fix it. She could find a desk that was broken and reuse it. They took a sign from a restaurant and put it up. And so they opened. One person came, another. Slowly, the pharmacy was working, but not well enough. And so that's when they created the rules. Well, this is the pharmacy, by the way. Looks like a pharmacy. The rules of the pharmacy. The first rule is to be available. The second, to be attentive. The third, to be dependable, and the fourth, to be kind. Be available. They opened early, and they stayed open late. Be attentive. They learned everyone's names, the names of their kids. They gave people coffee. They gave them a place to sit. Be dependable. If they didn't have something, they would go and get it from another pharmacy. And be kind. During war, one of the first things that can disappear is kindness. And they wanted to save that. They wanted to still be kind. So they implemented the rules of the pharmacy. They woke up. They opened early. Everyone who came, they learned their name. They learned the names of their kids. They called them to see if they were feeling better. And slowly, slowly, people started coming from further and further away. But they weren't coming to get medicine. They were coming to have someone to talk to. Someone to whom they could say, I'm tired. This was medicine for the soul. Eventually, Adnan and Gadir had to escape, but they brought the story of the pharmacy with them. And they always said the second pharmacy was more successful than the first. Here are some of the lessons that I learned from Adnan and Gadir's pharmacy that I think that we can all use. One is the first and most obvious in the Ignatian tradition. Adnan was depressed for an entire year, and then he felt a calling. We call these cannonball moments, right? Cannonball moments named after when Ignatius was hit by a cannonball and only then realized the calling of his life. So if you feel down or you feel depressed, don't worry about it. This might be the beginning of something new. Listen to what makes you restless. Adnan and Gadir became upset that their neighbors couldn't get medicine, and they thought, oh, we can do something about that. I don't know if you've ever had the experience where you see something and it makes you upset. Oh, people don't have food, I can do something about that, right? People need to learn a language, I can do something about that. Oh, somebody's sitting alone at the table, I can do something about that. When you feel that restlessness in your heart, listen to it. Most often, that's God. Listen to what you love, whether it's like making a cookie during the war, like my friends back home, or taking care of people. We can always do what we love, and nothing takes that away from us. Look into the ruins, face reality. We call this in Ignatian spirituality a long, loving look at the real. That means look into the ruins, look at things as they are, and then look again with the eyes of creation. The eyes of creation are what we call hope, right? I can tell you something very simple, which is that every single problem I've ever seen in the world comes from one thing, and that's a lack of imagination, right? People say, oh, it's too bad we have to go to war, we don't have the choice. Or they say, oh, we have to stop migrants at the border, we don't have the choice. Or they say, oh, we don't want to make weapons, but we have to, we don't have the choice. And as people of faith, we say, that's not true. We always have the choice. We always have the choice. And our role is to see, even if we don't see the way out now, we know that it's there, and we go looking for it. We resist the logic that tells us that we have to wait, and we start the work now. Hope is a choice, and hope is a project. It's a daily practice. It's a decision to wake up every day and listen to the voice of love inside of you and to answer yes. And so I'm here with their stories to ask you to let these next 4 years be a school of hope. Train yourself to notice when that voice says, that's not possible, you can't do this. And make a choice to live in the world differently. This is the great adventure that you have in front of you, to welcome when others urge you to turn away, to love when others urge you to hate. When people ask me what it's like to live during wartime, I often say it's like being in a place with no adults in the room. It's like you have a problem and all the people you expected to solve it aren't there. But when I see Hannah and Farhad and Hozan, when I see a dress made, when I see a song that exists, it gives me hope. And when I see young people like you, I also have hope. I'm counting on you to dismantle systems of justice, to build a new and better world, one of inclusion and belonging. I'm begging you to build a world in which weapons will no longer exist and the terrible wars that we have been living in will finally stop. In which all of you will say with your lives, enough. Today, according to the UN Refugee Agency, 1 in every 69 people in the world is forcibly displaced. 1 in every 69 people is forcibly displaced. 40% of them are under the age of 18, which means they will be your friends, they'll be your neighbors, they'll be your teachers, and unfortunately one day it might be any of us. It's up to us to imagine a world that so many have been trying to convince us is impossible, one in which those seeking shelter and sanctuary will be welcomed and celebrated. I just want to end with one story I didn't plan to tell, but I'll tell it. I was traveling across the border one day. I was in northern Jordan, and I asked people what they were saving, and they told me a story. When the first people escaped from Syria into Jordan, they arrived and they discovered something which is terrible. So Syrians love to eat this dish called makdous. Makdous is this tiny eggplant. And you pickle it and have it with peppers and walnuts inside of it. When they arrived in Jordan, they discovered to their horror that eggplants were too big to make makdous. So they called their relatives back home and they said, if you also have to escape the war, carry our seeds. And so the next generation, when they escaped, they came carrying their seeds. And when I arrived, they were growing Syrian eggplants in exile, perfect for makdous. I want you to hear that story because I want you to know that little things matter. The tiny things you do matter. And all you have to do is one little thing. Like Farhad says, create something, make a cake, light a candle, do something to bring some goodness in the world. Live life in the opposite direction. We have a saying in Arabic that I'm begging you all to live by, and that's simply this: "Awwal ash-shajara bidra." Every tree begins with a seed. Hope is a project. All we have to do is say yes, and I'm asking you to say yes today. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you all. Have a wonderful night. Go plant seeds.